Hi, everyone. I'm Teresa Flynn, and welcome to the March 2024 Select Board Roundtable. Why don't we take a second to go around and introduce ourselves?
Sure. I'm Michelle Conlon. I'm Beth Cassavant.
John Samia.
Carlos Garcia.
Okay. So we are in the Select Board, Select Men's Room. Is it still called the Select Men's Room?
I think we need to rename it.
Yeah, well,
Campaign.
we're in town hall. And the reason we're in town hall is because just after this recording is the start of the fiscal 25 budget hearings. So right now we are in the Finance Committee part of the public hearings. So over the course of several hours tonight and several hours, no, all day Saturday, I should say, both the municipal departments and the school department will bring their proposed budget forward to the Finance Committee. It's already been released. It's available publicly. Each have talked about it in their respective meetings. Kevin Mizikar has talked about it, of course, in our select board meetings, and Joe Sawyer, our superintendent of schools, has talked about it in school committee meetings. But these are public hearings, so not only is it the opportunity for the Finance Committee to review it in detail, but for the community at large, residents, to come in and ask away. So in general, for fiscal 25, it's about $186 million budget. Municipal side is proposing a 4% increase, and I believe the schools are just under 4.5%. So again, if you're wondering, where does the money go? How is it being spent? What's driving these increases? Definitely tune in or attend. And I think that we had discussed at one of our recent meetings about our current override agreement. So at the last Proposition 2.5 override that the town approved, we made a commitment to ensure that we would not ask the town for an additional override for at least 4 years. And this was intended to be a stabilization for the town. And obviously, you, Beth, were very instrumental in, being part of that. And John, you were both on the select board at the time that this was brought forward to ensure that we did not keep creating this cliff where all of a sudden we didn't have the funding to maintain critical town and school services. So we committed to 4 years, and we have now announced that we are going out to 6 years. So really making sure that we are being very careful in the budgeting and the spending, and ensuring that we extend that stabilization, if you will, for as long as possible. So I've done all the talking so far, so please.
You're doing a great job. You want to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, the important piece, as you said, we are honoring our commitment, exceeding our commitment. Not only stable, but sustainability was important as part of the override. And what the town manager had done is created that fiscal forecast that continuously is looked at, refined, fine-tuned, and we have conversations regularly looking at the out years and understanding that beyond a certain point can be speculative, but we have a solid handle on the Schedule A receipts, the state funding, what's going out in terms of what the departments need for expenses, and stuck to our commitment. It's through fiscal and prudent management, conservative fiscal and prudent management, looking through and honoring what we told the taxpayers back then. It's worked well. And look forward to hearing from people, residents during the budget cycle, but obviously all throughout the year through office hours, just to put that out there as well. The first Tuesday of every month, we're available 5:30 to 6:30 before our regularly scheduled meeting. Happy to hear from you about the budget or whatever's on your mind.
And I think just, at a high level, I always, when people ask me about it, because I think, we're trying to be very transparent. We don't want to impose tax increases on people. But what we've recognized with the town budget is that, we've talked about how hard it is to, maintain on average, talking from the municipal side, this, no more than 4% increase year over year. And Proposition 2.5, doesn't allow us to impose more than, the 2.5% increase to the levy. So it's, you can see where if we're trying to really hard to maintain it 4%, and we can only go up 2%, we create that cliff. So what we're trying to do is say to the community, this is how we can best manage this over the long term. Again, recognizing that it's not to add more to the town every year. And I think as we've talked about in our meetings, we've heard from various departments, here's the ask, and we have to say no to a lot of things because, quite frankly, the town just can't afford to provide everything. So we really have to look at what is most critical. And so, long-winded way of saying we hope people will continue to work with us and engage with us to make sure that everybody fully understands the entire budget and why we talk about the future override. I have some people, I had someone say to me recently, like, I know you're going to ask for an override sometime. And I'm like, yes. I mean, that's the plan.
Now, right? That's the model now. It was always taboo to talk about an override or the need for an override. It was always seen as mismanagement on the part of, the manager and town departments, but that's not actually the case, right? It's because of good fiscal management that we are able to live within the 2.5% that we can raise through the levy every year. But we don't want to be in a place where it's a catastrophe, and that we are asking for an override to avoid, soaring class sizes or severe reductions in town services. I think people come to expect a certain amount of service, and if we want to maintain it, we're here saying it very loudly, right? We're saying in 2 years, we're coming to ask again, because we know that if we want to maintain the current level of service, that's something that we would need to decide as a community to do. And the community may decide that's not what they want to do, and we would live within that and make the appropriate changes to the way that we operate. Again, it's not 5 people here making a decision. It's a community conversation.
Of course.
Yeah, and with the strategic plan, which had a lot of feedback from stakeholders throughout our community, it gives as well another blueprint for the community to move forward on, and that's what does inform our budget process and plays a large role in that. Another interactive process with the community, and that is set the guideline for us how we want to go forward together with the community's wants and needs, but fighting against inflation and external factors. And that's why it's a constant review of the financial model. It's balancing numbers because numbers are numbers, but with the community's wants and needs and desires together with our strategic plan. So it's not being everything that everyone wants, it's a balance. And that's what we do every year, and that's part of this process. And that's why the hearing is so valuable, to hear from community members, because maybe wants and preferences change, but you don't know if we don't hear. And that's why hopefully we get tonight and Saturday or at our office hours that opportunity, and multiple opportunities to talk to us or leadership and let us know what your feelings are.
Yeah, absolutely. With the strategic plan, every department head ties their budgetary requests for to the strategic plan. So it's making these planned improvements that we know the community is looking for, we know the community wants, and how those budget requests are tied to that plan. The other piece, being able to bring, take that commitment of, not coming back to taxpayers for 4 years to ask for another override, being able to bring that out to 6 years is because, we had that money coming in, and whether it was, growth that it brought more revenue, or it was local receipts, different things that brought that money in. Instead of spending that when it was available, we actually set it aside in that stabilization fund so that we were able to extend the life of that override, and minimize any impact that we have on our taxpayers. So it's important, important decision making that went into this.
Yeah, and I think you said it at a recent meeting, Beth, and you said it well. It was, we don't take it lightly. We know that it's not something that people would necessarily vote for, and we can't bank on it, and we have to show that we're doing everything possible. If for some reason revenue exceeded expectations and we could go out further, we would go out further. We would put this off for as long as possible.
And we're also mindful of the external cost pressures that residents face, again, with inflation, with higher cost affordability, looking at real estate now, and we'll talk about it shortly with zoning. That's largely due to the desire to extend housing opportunities, but it's still have a tremendous demand for members for individuals to move into Shrewsbury because it's a great community, but we do know through data in the recent past that younger people, 25 to 34, we've had people leaving town because of affordability. So we're mindful of that as well, understanding that people are struggling as well. Not everyone is in good times, and we want to make sure that our decisions positively impact as many as possible, and that's what we balance when we go through this process.
And that's a good point. There are those that really would struggle with paying more. And, quite frankly, even those that could afford it, they don't want to pay more taxes. Like, we get it. No one does. So great segue. We had talked at our last roundtable about how we really want to make sure we're addressing things that are top of mind for people. And I had said that I don't think anybody really watches us. Well, lo and behold, I was walking down the street and a friend of mine said, I saw you, I heard you. And granted, she might have been channel surfing and been like, oh, there's Teresa. But I was very excited that someone responded to my comment that nobody watches. But let's talk about the MBTA Community Zoning Initiative. So we talked about the fact that we want to talk about big things during these roundtables. This is a really big thing, and we've been trying to sort of beat the drum on it, but let's go a little bit deeper right now. So I thought it might be helpful if I just gave it's a very I don't know, detailed, complex thing. But let me just try and take it at, a very high level. So it is a law. I guess first and foremost, I think it's important for people to realize it is a Massachusetts general law. It requires MBTA communities to have at least one zoning district in which multifamily housing is permitted by right. So an MBTA community includes those with an MBTA station, like a commuter rail or, the red line, a green line that we're familiar with, and MBTA adjacent communities. And those are neighbors of a town with an MBTA commuter line. So there are 177 MBTA communities that are subject to these new requirements. Shrewsbury is one of them. So Shrewsbury is an adjacent community under this law. Westboro, Worcester, and Grafton all have commuter lines, and we are adjacent to them. Under the requirements, we are required to provide zoning by right for a minimum of 1,497 multifamily units on a minimum land area of 50 acres. We are required to comply with this law by the end of 2024. So that's the high level. So then we get to sort of where we are right now. The planning department has proposed that we zone one area in and around the Christmas tree shops. If we consider mandatory mixed use, we can offset about 370 units. So our minimum requirement would go down to just about 1,120. Mm-hmm. And all of this is currently being reviewed by the planning board. And the final proposal will be brought forward to town meeting in May. And I think the last thing I would say, again, at a high level, we're not required to build. We are required to have zoning by right. So maybe I'll open it up to anything that I might have missed.
That was very well done.
Just a couple other things. It was well done. The whole point of this legislation when it was enacted in 2021 to deal with the housing crisis. And a few things, rising housing costs, but particularly in the Commonwealth, historically low levels of new housing development, impacts of vulnerable populations and the housing cost burden, missing middle housing, and demands for a variety of housing opportunities. That's at the state level. And the state said, great, you have till December 31st, 2024 to enact this. If you don't, you'll lose funding opportunities with particular grants, and they're 13 cited, such as MassWorks, Housing Choice, local capital projects. We know in Shrewsbury that's about $4.8 million that we're talking about, at least presently. And as was presented to us even at our last meeting, usually what happens is you get a grant and then there's more work related to that project that you get more additional dollars from. And that's all at risk, and it really is. And not only is it a law, but the state, we saw Milton, the town of Milton, the town meeting approved it. Then there was a referendum and they overturned it. And within the last few weeks, the state has said, well, you did that, now we're going to pull away all funding. And they've gone now to the Supreme Judicial Court come by October. So the state is going to do everything it can to enforce this. The offset is real economic cost for us if we don't do it. And we also asked a lot of questions, and if you look at our March 12th meeting, when Chris McGoldrick came and presented to us, just asked about why this one contiguous parcel, they don't have to be, as opposed to the other choices, and he gave really good examples or answers, but what he also said is, we're doing what we need to comply. We're not doing anything beyond that, which is important. He's not trying to reinvent the wheel here, but make sure that we're compliant. We don't lose the funding opportunities. He also pointed out, for example, Northborough, where they're doing theirs, is right next to where right now is currently being vetted through the community, through the public hearings, and there'll be one in March and one in April as well to talk about that. So it's required by the state. Communities that have said no, there's a serious consequence. To Shrewsbury, there'd be a serious consequence as well, millions of dollars. And looking at it, we're just going through the process now. And as you had said, Teresa, where we are in terms of hearings, and there's been a lot of feedback to date from questionnaires and responses from residents, and taking all that into consideration. Public feedback still now through May, and then the recommendation will be presented at town meeting for town meeting approval. But there's a lot going on, and you hear, depending on the community, what's happening. But the other thing is, and can't emphasize enough what you had said, is it doesn't require that we develop. You also get credit for where the overlay is in terms of what's already developed. So when the numbers are calculated, it's as if on all of that land, there's nothing there.
But there is.
But there is. So it's not 50 acres or the number of acres and it's virgin land and you have to all of a sudden develop it based on this density. But it's a parcel to comply with this, but there are a lot of other factors within that. And that's what was presented to us in a thoughtful way, and wanted to hear back from residents to see if they agree with the town's professionals as to what's presented.
And I think the other thing too is, to all those points, but also recognizing that under 40B and the fact that we haven't met our 10% affordability threshold, that there's also, even if we didn't zone there, there's a very likelihood that that would become multifamily housing development.
inquiries.
Right. So it's sort of this like, how do we approach this in a way where, people may not like the idea that there's this opportunity for that development, but how do we mitigate like sort of just how broad or how much higher that could possibly.
Because it would also be all housing under 40B. They don't have interest in being mixed use, whereas if we are adopting MBTA zoning on that parcel, we could require the mixed use, and it brings down the number of units that we are required to zone for.
Exactly. And the fact that, we had said it's a minimum of 50 acres, but I think the planning board's proposal is over 100, might be 150 acres, but that is
Reduce the density.
to reduce the density. So again, it's like you have 50 acres, we could have,
High rise,
huge
yes.
highs, right? So, I mean, I would say that, even though we're listening to community members and concerns, when we kind of get the question of, I had a friend ask me, because she's hearing the buzz, she's like, you have to do this, right? And it's like, it's a law. We have to do that. And I know Milton's getting, and Milton's a different, Milton, we're an adjacent community. They have concerns with the fact that they were designated as an MBTA community because they have a trolley that goes through, and that was deemed to be rapid transit. Like it's a little different than the situation that we're doing, but it is it's not just losing out on certain funding. It's the state is bringing suit against towns that don't comply. Like they've made it very clear. So I think our responsibility is to also balance it with, non-compliance and what risk that puts to us, not just financially, but on other levels. So, when my answer is right now, yes, I do feel like we need to comply, and I think that working with everyone and getting this community feedback, hopefully doing it in a way where people not only understand, but sort of, know what other options are, and we come to as much agreement as possible, because this is something, as we said, that ultimately is decided by town meeting.
Yeah. And the state has showed, how serious they are about this. They're, with the case of Milton, they're not waiting until the end of 2024 to declare them in non-compliance. It was immediate, and those consequences were immediate for Milton, and they're real. And there's something for a community like ours, $5 million for critical infrastructure projects and things like that it's really serious consequences. So, it's important. I don't have the dates in front of me. I apologize. But there are some opportunities to learn more about the MBTA project. There are some specific opportunities for town meeting members, and then there's others for the public. I think Teresa looks like maybe have the dates in front of her.
I do. So yeah, so and I think they're all for general public. I think I had originally said one of them or two of them were designated just for town meeting, but they are on the town's website. But they're March 28th, April 2nd, April 19th, and March 15th. So there's a combination of hybrid, in person, and virtual within those. And I think Chris McGoldrick from, our planning director has made it clear, if you have questions, you can also reach out to the planning department. But we definitely want to make sure that everyone has a full understanding. And I think we get it. People are there are some people that think like, I get it, there is a housing shortage. People need a place to live. Others are, like, oh my gosh, it's so crowded. It's there's been so much growth in our town and we don't want any more. And then they start to associate it with, the schools. Like, this is just going to make our schools, that much more crowded. And even though we show statistics about, the number of school-age children that come from apartments versus that come from, single family homes. And so we're listening to all of this, and we really want to make sure, again, our voice going to the planning board and everyone else just as much as the rest of the community is how do we approach this in a thoughtful way that minimizes the impacts as much as possible. But I think, we understand it's a lot. It's one thing to say we have to zone by right. We don't have to build. Will there be building? It is TBD.
I think there's going to be building either way. That's the thing. Like, we know, right? We don't have to have a crystal ball to know that there's going to be building on that site, and it's very likely to be multifamily housing. So why would we not get the credit for it and be in compliance? And, when people are concerned about the number of school-age children, I always like to give them the facts, right? That out of the Lakeway Commons apartments, there's 19 school children this year. Out of the Market Basket, I think there's 20 or 22. And that astounds people. I think that everyone kind of gets in their mind the units that are, Madison Place, which is across from the CVS on South Street, which
Yes.
always seems to have a lot of kids. And again, our elementary schools are not crowded. That's also something that people need to kind of reset their mind around, is that once Beale opened, that crowding, the redistricting took care of that, and there's parity among our elementary schools, and there's no longer a crowding problem. That's not to say we want to build 700 apartments and flood our schools.
No.
And again, when you talk about crowding in a school, we know that there's significant overcrowding at the high school, but that's been going on for like 20 years.
Yeah.
And when you have school children come from an apartment complex, they're not all going to one school. They're going to be spread out among grades pre-K through 12. So again, I think we need to take a step back and understand what are the real implications here, and how are we going to manage this? Because like you said, it is a state law, and we are not in the business of not complying with state laws.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I come from the side, like, I didn't buy a house until I was in my 30s, and I rented, and I work with a young woman who, recently graduated from Holy Cross, and she works with us now, and found out that she's living in, an apartment in Shrewsbury. And we get it. It's the state has become more and more, populated, and single family homes are certainly very expensive. But, I remember living in West Newton, and my parents were renting, and they wanted to buy a home. They were still in their 20s. They couldn't afford to buy in West Newton. They moved to Northborough, which, this is, of course, 40 years ago. But
It was like moving to the woods.
it was like, they had to move that much away from, and now it's, what the running joke is that they couldn't afford to buy a home there today. But it's like, you get the point. It's sort of this, it's important. I get, I'm not saying I agree with it, but I get sort of where the state was coming from in terms of it's important to our economy to have people that are working within our economy, and that we are a place where businesses can thrive. And in order for businesses to thrive, you need employees, and employees need a place to live. And there are a lot of young professionals that, don't live in single family homes. So when you look at it that way, it's like, oh, but again, we understand it feels daunting, and we wanted to sort of take this time to sort of outline what's required of us right now, where we are in the process. As Michelle said, there are these sessions where you can come in and give your opinions or learn more about it. And then we will, see what the planning board ultimately puts as a recommendation to be on the warrant that goes forward for approval at town meeting.
And I think just one more piece to think about is that this draft language, if it's adopted at town meeting, will have a mixed use requirement, which I think is something that the community should think about, because that commercial opportunity will still be there. There's still room for that, and that's very important as we grow our commercial tax base. And I hope that folks at home do take a chance to attend the hearings and ask their questions, because this is a process that started back, I think, in 2021, and the planning board does have a page on the town site that has the whole map of all of the steps that we have taken to get to this point. So there have been a lot of opportunities to learn more, but there's obviously always room to improve that understanding. So really hope that people take that opportunity.
Yeah, they can always reach out to us too. We're happy to. I always love to talk to people about town stuff. They get stuck with me on the phone. Next thing you know, they're running for town meeting and we're running away.
People call me and I tell them to call Beth. So. All right. Well, I think that's our time.
We have 1 minute.
Oh, that is our time. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you in April.